I still check my locks 3 times every night before bed, and it's been 2 years since what happened. My name is Sarah, and what I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about online safety and trusting strangers. It was March 2022, and I had just moved to Riverside, California for a new job at Pacific Industries. I was 28, recently out of a long relationship, and honestly just looking to meet some new people in a city where I knew absolutely nobody. Dating apps felt too intense, so I thought I'd try something more casual. Maybe find someone to grab coffee with or check out local events. I posted in the Craigslist, strictly platonic section. Nothing fancy. New to Riverside, looking for friends to explore the city with. Love hiking, trying new restaurants, and live music. 28F, just moved here for work. I included a photo of myself at a hiking trail from my previous city, nothing revealing, just me smiling in a baseball cap and sunglasses. Within hours, I had maybe 15 responses. Most were clearly not looking for anything platonic, despite what I'd specified. But one stood out. A guy named Michael Thompson wrote this really thoughtful message about his favorite hiking spots around Riverside, recommended a few restaurants I should try, and mentioned he'd been in the city for 5 years and would be happy to show me around. He seemed normal, friendly, and respectful. We exchanged a few more emails over the next couple days. He told me he worked in IT for a local healthcare company, lived in an apartment complex on Cedar Lane, and had moved to Riverside from Ohio. He asked about my work. I'd mentioned I was in marketing, and seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me as a person. After about a week of casual emails, he suggested we meet for coffee at this place called Riverside Roasters on Main Street. I agreed, but I wasn't stupid about it. I told my coworker Jennifer where I was going, sent her his email address, and planned to drive myself. The coffee shop was public, busy, and I'd scoped it out earlier in the week during my lunch break. It seemed like the perfect safe first meeting. March 15th was a Tuesday, and it had been drizzling all morning, typical spring weather for California. I got to Riverside Roasters around 7 p.m., and Michael was already there. He looked exactly like his photo, average height, brown hair, probably early 30s, wearing a blue button-down shirt and jeans. Nothing threatening or unusual about him. The conversation started normally. He knew all the places he mentioned in his emails, had great recommendations for weekend activities, and seemed genuinely interested in helping me settle into the city. He asked about my apartment. I had mentioned I was still unpacking, and offered to help if I needed anything heavy moved. Nice guy, right? But about 30 minutes into our coffee, I started noticing things. Small things that individually didn't seem like much, but together felt off. He knew I drove a 2018 Honda Accord. I'd never mentioned my car in any of our emails. When I asked how he knew, he laughed and said he just guessed because marketing people always drive practical cars. Weird response, but I let it slide. Then he mentioned that my apartment complex probably had great mountain views. I'd never told him which complex I lived in, just that I was still unpacking. When I pointed this out, he said he'd seen a lot of the newer developments going up and figured that's where most young professionals ended up. Again, plausible explanation. But the one that really got my attention was when he said, "I bet you're glad to finally have your hiking boots unpacked. You looked so happy on that trail in your photo." The thing is, I wasn't wearing hiking boots in the photo I'd sent him. I was wearing regular sneakers. It was a detail you'd only know if you'd seen other photos of me. I started feeling uncomfortable, but I didn't want to be rude or paranoid. Maybe I was overthinking things. We finished our coffee, and he walked me to my car, a silver Honda Accord parked right where I'd left it. He didn't ask where I'd parked. He just knew. "This was really nice, Sarah," he said as we reached my car. "I'd love to take you to that hiking spot I mentioned. Maybe this weekend?" I told him I'd think about it and let him know. I got in my car, locked the doors immediately, and drove home feeling unsettled. Something wasn't right, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. That night, I went through our entire email chain again. I looked at every message, trying to figure out how he knew the things he knew. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. In his very first email, the one where he'd responded to my Craigslist ad, he'd mentioned that Riverside Roasters made great coffee and I should try their lavender latte. But here's the thing, I'd never mentioned coffee shops in my original ad. I'd never mentioned liking lattes. And when I'd agreed to meet him there, he'd suggested it like it was a random choice. He'd known where he wanted to meet me before we'd even started talking about meeting. I spent the next hour going through his emails with fresh eyes. The hiking spots he'd recommended were all within 5 miles of my apartment complex. The restaurants were all places I could walk to from where I lived. He wasn't just giving me general city recommendations, he was giving me recommendations based on where I specifically lived. And I'd never told him my address. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I called in sick to work and spent the day trying to figure out how this guy knew so much about me. I started with the obvious. I Googled myself. My social media was pretty locked down, but my LinkedIn had my company name. From there, someone could probably figure out the general area where I lived, but not my specific apartment complex. Then I remembered something. The day before our coffee meeting, I'd gotten home from work to find a Pacific Industries business card tucked under my windshield wiper. I'd assumed it was some kind of recruitment thing. Maybe HR was trying to network with other companies in the area. I'd thrown it away without thinking about it. But what if it wasn't from my company at all? What if someone had put it there to confirm where I worked? By Thursday, I'd convinced myself I was being paranoid. Michael sent another email asking about the weekend hike, and I decided to politely decline and see if that was the end of it. I sent a brief response saying I was busy getting settled and maybe we could reconnect in a few weeks. His response came back within 10 minutes. No problem at all, Sarah. I know how stressful moving can be. Take all the time you need to get comfortable in your new place on Willow Court. I'd never told him the name of my street. I immediately called the Riverside Police Department. The officer I spoke with was polite but not particularly helpful. I hadn't been threatened, nothing criminal had technically happened, and meeting someone from Craigslist wasn't illegal. He suggested I block the guy's email and be more careful about personal information in the future. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Friday evening, I was coming home from grocery shopping when I noticed a dark blue 2019 Ford Fusion parked across the street from my apartment complex. The same car had been in the Riverside Roasters parking lot on Tuesday. The same car I'd seen in my company's parking garage on Wednesday when I'd gone in late after calling in sick. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching. The driver never got out, never moved. Just sat there. When I finally worked up the courage to drive into my complex, the Ford Fusion pulled away. Saturday morning, I found a note on my car windshield. Handwritten, simple. Hope you're settling in well. Your neighbor, Michael. He wasn't my neighbor. I'd met all my actual neighbors when I'd moved in 2 weeks earlier. That's when I realized what had happened. Michael Thompson hadn't responded to my Craigslist ad randomly. He'd been watching me, learning about me, and when I posted that ad looking for friends, it was like I'd given him the perfect opening to approach me. The coffee meeting wasn't a chance to get to know each other. It was his chance to confirm details he already knew and see how much I'd figured out. I called the police again. This time, I got Detective Rodriguez, who took my concerns more seriously. She explained that what I was describing sounded like stalking behavior, and while it hadn't escalated to criminal activity yet, I should document everything and be prepared to get a restraining order if it continued. The problem with these situations, Detective Rodriguez told me, is that by the time we can prove criminal intent, the victim is often in real danger. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I never heard from Michael Thompson again after that weekend. I changed my email address, modified my work schedule so I wasn't arriving and leaving at predictable times, and started parking in different spots. After a month with no contact, I began to think maybe he'd moved on. But then my downstairs neighbor, Mrs. Chin, mentioned something that chilled me to the bone. She'd been living in the complex for 3 years, and about a month before I'd moved in, she noticed a man hanging around the courtyard area, looking at the apartment listings posted by the management office. "Nice young man," she said. "Said he was thinking about moving here, wanted to see what kind of people lived in the building. Asked a lot of questions about the tenants." Michael Thompson had been planning this for weeks before I'd even posted that Craigslist ad. I ended up moving apartments 2 months later. Not just to a different complex, but to a different part of the city entirely. I never posted on Craigslist again, and I'm incredibly careful about what personal information I share online. The thing that haunts me most is how normal he seemed. How easy it would have been to agree to that weekend hike, to meet him somewhere isolated, to trust someone who'd spent weeks learning everything about me while I knew nothing about him. I think about other women who might have gotten similar emails from him. I wonder how many people respond to online ads not realizing that the person contacting them already knows exactly who they are and where they live. 2 years later, I still don't know Michael Thompson's real name, where he actually lived, or whether he was really from Ohio. I don't know if he targeted other women the same way he targeted me, or if I was just unlucky enough to catch his attention. What I do know is that my instinct to trust people, to assume good intentions, nearly put me in serious danger. And that feeling of being watched, of having someone know intimate details about your life while you know nothing about them, that stays with you. I've never felt completely safe since then, but I've learned to listen to those small warning signs that something isn't quite right. Sometimes paranoia isn't paranoia at all. Sometimes it's survival. Have you ever had someone contact you online who seemed to know more about you than they should? What warning signs have you ignored when meeting strangers from the internet? I'd been in animal control for 12 years, and I thought I'd seen everything. Hoarding cases, neglect situations, illegal breeding operations, you name it, I've dealt with it. But what I encountered on April 3, 2023, in the small town of Fairview, still makes me question how people can live in such conditions while appearing completely normal to the outside world. My name is Detective Lisa Martinez with the Fairview Animal Control Division, and this case started with what seemed like a routine Craigslist complaint. It was a Monday morning when our office received a call from Mrs. Patricia Williams, an elderly woman who lived on Pine Road. She was concerned about her neighbor, a woman named Carol Henderson, who had been posting ads on Craigslist for weeks giving away cats. To good homes only. "The thing is," Mrs. Williams explained, "I see people coming and going from that house at all hours, and I keep hearing more and more cats meowing. It doesn't sound like she's giving them away, it sounds like she's collecting them. I get calls like this more often than you'd think." Well-meaning neighbors who hear a few cats and assume the worst. Usually it's someone with 3 or 4 cats who doesn't spay or neuter, and we end up with an educational visit about responsible pet ownership. Nothing dramatic. But Mrs. Williams was persistent. She'd been living next door to Carol Henderson for 8 years, and according to her, the cat situation had been escalating dramatically over the past 6 months. "Officer Martinez," she said, "I counted 17 different people showing up with cat carriers just last week. And they were all leaving empty-handed while the cats stayed behind. Something's not right over there." I decided to drive by the Henderson residence that afternoon, just to get a sense of the situation. The house at 247 Pine Road looked normal enough from the outside, a modest 2-story home with white siding, probably built in the 1980s. There was a 2015 Toyota Camry in the driveway, the lawn was somewhat maintained, and nothing immediately screamed problem property. But as I sat in my unmarked 2020 Chevrolet Tahoe across the street, I started noticing things. The windows were all covered with heavy curtains or blankets, even though it was a bright spring day. There was a strong smell in the air that I couldn't quite identify from that distance, but it wasn't pleasant. And Mrs. Williams was right about the sound. Even with my windows up, I could hear what sounded like dozens of cats meowing, yowling, and crying. I was about to approach the front door when I saw Carol Henderson herself come outside. She was probably in her mid-50s, wearing a floral dress and cardigan that looked clean and well-maintained. Her hair was styled, she had makeup on, and she looked like any other suburban woman you'd see at the grocery store. Nothing about her appearance suggested someone living in unsanitary conditions. She got in her Toyota Camry and drove away, so I decided to come back later when she was home. That evening, I returned to Pine Road and knocked on Carol Henderson's front door. The smell hit me immediately, the unmistakable odor of ammonia, feces, and something else I couldn't identify. It was so strong I had to take a step back. Carol answered the door with a bright smile, looking exactly as put together as she had that afternoon. "Can I help you, officer?" I introduced myself and explained that we'd received reports about multiple cats on the property. I asked if I could come inside to do a welfare check on the animals. "Oh, of course," she said cheerfully. "I run a small rescue operation. I'm always happy to show off my babies to fellow animal lovers." She opened the door wider, and I stepped into what I can only describe as a nightmare. The smell inside was overwhelming. My eyes immediately started watering, and I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. The living room, which should have been a normal space with furniture and maybe a TV, was completely overrun with cats. They were everywhere, on makeshift shelves lining the walls, in carriers stacked from floor to ceiling, wandering freely across furniture that was completely destroyed by claws and covered in hair and waste. "How many cats do you currently have on the property, Ms. Henderson?" I asked, trying to maintain my professional composure. "Oh, it changes all the time," she said casually, stepping over two cats who were fighting near her feet. "I'd say probably around 60 or 70 right now. Maybe more, they're always having babies." I pulled out my notepad and started documenting what I was seeing. The cats ranged from tiny kittens who couldn't have been more than a few weeks old to adult cats that looked severely malnourished. Many had visible health issues, matted fur, discharge from their eyes and noses, limping, and skin conditions. The smell was coming from overflowing litter boxes, maybe 6 total for what appeared to be far more than 70 cats. "Ms. Henderson, are you licensed to operate an animal rescue in Fairview?" I asked. "Well, no, but I don't really consider it a business," she replied. "I just love cats, and there are so many that need homes. People bring them to me, and I try to find them good families." As we talked, I noticed something disturbing. She kept referring to finding homes for the cats, but based on what Mrs. Williams had told me, cats were coming in but not going out. "Can you show me your adoption records?" I asked. "I'd like to see how many placements you've made recently." Her cheerful demeanor shifted slightly. "Oh, I don't really keep formal records. It's more of an informal thing. People see my ads on Craigslist, they come by, and if it seems like a good fit, they take a cat home." I asked to see the rest of the house. Carol hesitated for the first time since I'd arrived. "Some of the rooms are a bit messy right now," she said. "I'm in the middle of reorganizing." The kitchen was worse than the living room. The counters were covered with dozens of food bowls, many of them empty or containing food that looked days old. The sink was piled high with dirty dishes, and there were cats drinking from the faucet. The refrigerator was covered with printed Craigslist ads, dozens of them, all advertising free cats to good homes. But it was the basement that truly horrified me. Carol led me downstairs, apologizing for the temporary setup. The basement had been converted into what she called nursery areas. Dozens of wire cages stacked on top of each other, most containing mother cats with litters of kittens. The cages were barely large enough for the adult cats, let alone mothers with babies. Many of the cages had no litter boxes. The floor was covered with newspaper that was soaked through with urine and feces. The smell down there was so strong I had to excuse myself and go back upstairs to get fresh air. "Ms. Henderson," I said when I'd composed myself, "this situation constitutes animal neglect. These conditions are not sanitary, and many of these cats appear to need immediate veterinary care." For the first time, her cheerful facade cracked. "But I love them," she said, her voice getting higher. "I'm saving them. Do you know how many cats get euthanized in shelters every day? I'm giving them a chance at life." I explained that while her intentions might be good, the reality was that the cats were suffering. I counted at least 127 cats and kittens throughout the house, living in conditions that were dangerous to both the animals and to her. I need to call for backup, I told her. We're going to need to remove the animals and get them proper veterinary care. That's when Carol Henderson completely lost it. You can't take my babies, she screamed. They belong to me. I saved them. Without me, they'll die. She started grabbing cats randomly, clutching them to her chest while they struggled to get away. Some of the cats were so sick they barely moved. Others were clearly feral and terrified. These people who answer my ads, they don't really want the cats, she continued, tears streaming down her face. They just want to hurt them, or use them for fighting, or worse. I tell them the cats are adopted, but I keep them here where they're safe. It all clicked into place. Carol Henderson had been posting Craigslist ads for months, having people come to her house to adopt cats, but she never actually let anyone take the animals. She'd make excuses, say the cat they wanted was already adopted, or claimed she needed more time to make sure they were suitable owners. Meanwhile, she kept collecting more and more cats. The people coming to her house thought they were helping by adopting rescue cats. Instead, they were enabling a hoarding situation that was slowly killing the animals she claimed to love. It took 4 animal control officers, 2 veterinarians, and 6 volunteers from the local SPCA to safely remove all 127 cats from Carol Henderson's house over the next 8 hours. 43 of them had to be euthanized immediately due to severe illness and suffering. The rest required extensive medical treatment and rehabilitation. Carol was charged with 127 counts of animal neglect and cruelty. During the investigation, we discovered she'd been doing this for at least 2 years. She'd answer ads from people trying to rehome cats, convince them she was a legitimate rescue, and then add the animals to her collection. She'd also drive to neighboring towns and take cats from free to good home ads on Craigslist and Facebook. The house had to be condemned. The ammonia levels were so high they were dangerous to human health, and the structural damage from the cats was extensive. Carol Henderson was evicted and prohibited from owning more than 2 animals for the rest of her life. What haunts me about this case is how normal she appeared to everyone around her. Her neighbors knew she had cats, but they had no idea about the scope of the situation. She held down a job at a local insurance company, paid her bills on time, and seemed like a regular person who just happened to love animals. The people who responded to her Craigslist ads described her as sweet, caring, and obviously devoted to cats. They had no idea that their attempts to give her animals were contributing to massive suffering. During the psychological evaluation required by the court, Carol Henderson was diagnosed with hoarding disorder specifically related to animals. The psychiatrist explained that she genuinely believed she was saving the cats, even as they suffered and died around her. In her mind, any home other than hers was dangerous, so keeping them in increasingly horrible conditions was still better than letting them go. She served 6 months in jail, and was required to undergo 2 years of psychological treatment. As far as I know, she's complied with the restrictions on animal ownership, but cases like hers have a high rate of recurrence. The experience changed how I approach animal welfare calls. Now, when someone reports a neighbor with too many cats, I take it seriously immediately. What looks like animal love from the outside can actually be a form of mental illness that causes tremendous suffering. It also made me realize how easy it is for people with good intentions to accidentally enable animal hoarding. Those 17 people Mrs. Williams saw coming to Carol's house weren't part of some criminal conspiracy. They were ordinary people trying to help cats find homes. They had no way of knowing that their kindness was being twisted into something harmful. I still check Craigslist and Facebook regularly for suspicious animal rehoming posts. When you see the same person posting multiple free to good home ads or ads that seem too good to be true, it's worth investigating. Real animal rescues are licensed, have veterinary relationships, and maintain adoption records. They don't operate out of private homes with dozens of animals and no documentation. Have you ever responded to a free to good home pet ad online? What warning signs do you think people should look for when trying to rehome animals or adopt from individuals rather than legitimate shelters? I've been in retail loss prevention for 15 years, working with police departments across 3 states to investigate fraud, theft rings, and organized retail crime. But the case I'm about to tell you about still gives me chills, because it showed me how someone can use legitimate business practices to hide something much darker. My name is Detective Kevin Rogers with the Stockton Police Department's Economic Crimes Unit, and this investigation started in May 2023 with what seemed like a routine complaint about online sales fraud. The call came from a woman named Amanda Foster, who lived in one of the newer developments off Commerce Street. She'd purchased a laptop from someone on Craigslist 3 weeks earlier, and now the device was having serious problems that suggested it might be stolen property. "The thing is, Officer Rogers," Amanda explained when I met her at the Stockton police station, "this guy seemed so professional. He had references, a business card, even a receipt system. I never would have guessed there was anything shady about him." The seller's name was David Parker, and according to Amanda, he'd been operating what appeared to be a legitimate electronics resale business through Craigslist for at least 2 years. He sold refurbished laptops, tablets, phones, and gaming equipment at prices that were good but not suspiciously low. Everything came with basic warranties, and he even offered technical support. He knew everything about the products he was selling. Amanda continued. Specifications, compatibility issues, software recommendations. He spent over an hour with me explaining different options and helping me find exactly what I needed for my home office. But when Amanda's 2019 MacBook Pro started having activation issues, her IT support at work discovered something concerning. The device's serial number was flagged in Apple's database as reported stolen from a business in Sacramento 6 months earlier. I asked Amanda to walk me through her entire interaction with David Parker, starting from his original Craigslist ad. She pulled out her phone and showed me the saved listing. The ad was professionally written, included multiple high-quality photos of the laptop from different angles, and provided detailed technical specifications. It looked like something you'd see from a legitimate computer store, not a random person selling their old equipment. When I emailed him, Amanda said, he responded within 2 hours with additional information I'd requested and suggested we meet at the Starbucks on Pacific Avenue. He said he preferred public meetings for everyone's safety. The meeting itself had gone smoothly. David Parker arrived on time, driving a clean 2020 Ford Transit van with magnetic signs advertising Parker Electronics Quality Refurbished Devices. He was well-dressed, professional, and had printed business cards with his name, phone number, and email address. He brought 3 different laptops that met my specifications, Amanda recalled. He let me test each one, explained the pros and cons, and never pressured me to buy the most expensive option. He actually recommended the mid-priced one because it was the best fit for what I needed. David had accepted both cash and Venmo, provided a printed receipt with warranty information, and given Amanda his business card with a handwritten note about when to contact him if she had any questions. He even followed up a week later to make sure everything was working properly. She said, "I was so impressed with the customer service that I recommended him to 2 of my coworkers." This was starting to sound less like a fraud case and more like a legitimate business that happened to be selling stolen merchandise, possibly without realizing it. But something about the level of professionalism bothered me. Most people who unknowingly buy and resell stolen electronics don't invest in business cards, warranty systems, and customer follow-up procedures. I asked Amanda for David Parker's contact information and told her I'd look into the situation. My first step was to call the number on his business card. "Parker Electronics, this is David speaking," came a cheerful voice after 2 rings. I identified myself as a police officer and explained that I was investigating a stolen laptop that might have been sold through his business. I expected him to get defensive or hang up. Instead, he was incredibly cooperative. "Oh no, that's terrible," he said. "I buy most of my inventory from estate sales, business liquidations, and people upgrading their equipment. I always ask for proof of ownership, but sometimes people aren't honest about where they got their devices. I'll absolutely work with you to resolve this. He agreed to meet me at the police station the next day and said he'd bring his sales records and purchase documentation. David Parker showed up exactly on time, driving the same Ford Transit van Amanda had described. He was probably in his early 40s, wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, and carried a leather briefcase that looked like something a traveling salesman would use. What impressed me immediately was his organization. He had a detailed spreadsheet tracking every device he'd purchased and sold over the past 2 years, including dates, sources, serial numbers, sale prices, and customer contact information. For Amanda's laptop specifically, he had a receipt showing he'd purchased it from someone named Michael Chin at a garage sale in Sacramento. I always get a bill of sale when I buy equipment, David explained, showing me a carbon copy receipt book. I learned early on that documentation is crucial in this business, both for warranty purposes and to protect myself legally. He also had Amanda's information in what he called his customer database, a detailed record of her purchase, including her address, phone number, preferred contact method, and notes about what type of equipment she was looking for in case he found similar items. I pride myself on customer service, he said. If someone buys a laptop from me and mentions they're also looking for a tablet, I'll keep an eye out and contact them when I find something suitable. On the surface, everything looked legitimate. David Parker seemed like exactly what he claimed to be, a small business owner who bought used electronics and resold them at a reasonable profit. If one of his suppliers had sold him stolen merchandise, that wasn't necessarily his fault. But I decided to dig deeper into his customer database. David had provided me with Amanda's information readily enough, so I asked if I could see his full customer list to check for other potentially stolen items. He hesitated for the first time since I'd met him. Well, that's confidential customer information, he said. I need to see a warrant before I could share details about other buyers. That response was reasonable and actually made him seem more legitimate. A real business owner would be protective of customer privacy. But something about his demeanor had changed when I asked about the broader database. I thanked him for his cooperation and told him I'd be in touch if we needed anything else. But as he left the station, I noticed something odd. He sat in his van for almost 10 minutes before driving away, and I could see him making notes in what looked like the same leather briefcase he'd brought inside. I decided to run a background check on David Parker. What I found was interesting. He had no criminal record, but he also had no business license for Parker Electronics. The van was registered to him personally, not to a business entity. And when I checked with the California Secretary of State, there was no business registration under that name. That didn't necessarily mean anything illegal was happening. Plenty of small resellers operate informally without incorporating or getting business licenses. But combined with his reluctance to share customer information, it made me want to investigate further. I started by contacting some of the people David had claimed to buy equipment from. The Michaelchin, who supposedly sold him Amanda's laptop, didn't exist at the address on the bill of sale. The phone number went to a disconnected voicemail. Over the next week, I checked 5 more of his supplier receipts. 3 had fake addresses. 1 was for a house that had been vacant for months, and 1 was for a person who had died 2 years earlier. David Parker wasn't buying stolen electronics unknowingly. He was stealing them himself and creating fake purchase documentation to cover his tracks. But that raised another question. If he was running a theft operation, why was he so professional with his customers? Why the follow-up calls, the detailed records, and the customer service focus? The answer came when I finally got a warrant for his customer database. David Parker had detailed information on over 400 customers spanning 2 years. Names, addresses, phone numbers, email addresses, purchase histories, and personal notes about their technology needs and preferences. But more disturbing were the additional details he'd collected. For many customers, he had notes about their work schedules. Amanda works from home Tuesdays and Thursdays. Family situations. Single mom, 2 kids in elementary school. Home security. No alarm system visible, sliding door on back patio. And valuable items they'd mentioned during conversations. Mentioned having expensive camera equipment for photography hobby. David Parker wasn't just selling stolen electronics. He was using his legitimate-seeming business to case potential burglary targets. The follow-up calls weren't about customer service. They were intelligence gathering. He'd call customers a week after their purchase, asking how everything was working, whether they needed any accessories, and casually collecting information about their homes, schedules, and other valuables. We executed a search warrant on David Parker's residence on Elm Drive and found what can only be described as a criminal intelligence operation. He had detailed maps of Stockton neighborhoods with customer locations marked, surveillance photos of customers' homes, and schedules tracking when different people were likely to be at work or traveling. In his garage, we found stolen electronics worth over $150,000, burglary tools, and what appeared to be the contents of several home safes, jewelry, cash, important documents, and small valuables. David Parker had been burglarizing his own customers. His method was sophisticated. He'd sell someone a laptop or tablet, provide excellent customer service to build trust, then use follow-up contacts to learn about their routines and valuables. He'd identify customers who lived alone, worked predictable schedules, or mentioned going out of town, then burglarize their homes when he knew they'd be away. The really disturbing part was how he'd used his legitimate business interactions to avoid suspicion. When customers' homes were burglarized, they never suspected the friendly electronics dealer who'd provided such great customer service weeks or months earlier. The burglaries looked random, and victims had no reason to connect them to their Craigslist purchases. We identified at least 18 home burglaries that directly connected to David Parker's customer database. In some cases, he'd waited months between the sale and the burglary to avoid obvious connections. Amanda Foster had been scheduled to be his next target. His notes indicated she worked from home most days but had mentioned planning a weekend trip to visit family. He'd been watching her house, learning her routine, and waiting for the right opportunity. David Parker was arrested and charged with multiple counts of burglary, receiving stolen property, identity theft, and organized retail theft. During the investigation, we discovered he'd been operating similar schemes in Sacramento and Fresno under different business names. At his trial, the prosecutor described him as a predator who used the appearance of legitimate business to identify and victimize his own customers. He was sentenced to 12 years in state prison. What made this case so disturbing wasn't just the criminal activity. It was how David Parker had perverted normal business practices to facilitate his crimes. Customer service, follow-up calls, detailed record-keeping, and professional presentation are all things we associate with trustworthy businesses. He'd weaponized that trust. The case changed how I think about online sales safety. It's not enough to meet in public places and verify that items work properly. Criminals can be just as professional and organized as legitimate business owners. An excellent customer service can actually be a red flag if someone is trying too hard to build trust and gather personal information. Since David Parker's arrest, I've investigated 3 similar cases where criminals used legitimate-appearing sales operations to case burglary targets. It's a growing trend that combines organized retail theft with residential burglary, and it's particularly effective because victims never suspect the connection. The electronics David Parker sold were often functional and reasonably priced, so customers felt like they'd gotten good deals. The burglaries happened weeks or months later and seemed unrelated. Without Amanda Foster's stolen laptop triggering the investigation, he might have continued indefinitely. Have you ever bought electronics from someone on Craigslist who seemed unusually professional or interested in your personal details? What information do you think is appropriate for sellers to ask? And when does customer service cross the line into being too intrusive? I've been a personal trainer for 8 years, and I thought I'd seen every type of client possible. The overeager beginners, the ones who think they know better than their trainer, the people who want instant results without putting in the work. But what happened to me in September 2023 taught me that sometimes the clients who seem most dedicated are actually the most dangerous. My name is Jessica Chin, and I run my own fitness coaching business in Bakersfield, California. After working at big chain gyms for years, I'd branched out on my own, offering personalized training sessions and nutrition coaching. I advertised through several channels, including Craigslist, where I could reach people who might not have considered personal training before. The ad I posted was straightforward. Certified personal trainer, customized fitness programs. 8 years experience, specializing in weight loss, strength training, and lifestyle coaching. First consultation free. Flexible scheduling, reasonable rates. I got the usual mix of responses, some serious inquiries, some people just price shopping, and the occasional inappropriate message I'd learned to ignore. But one response stood out because of how thoughtful and detailed it was. The email came from someone named Robert Martinez, who explained that he was 34 years old, worked in accounting, and had been struggling with his fitness and confidence for years. He tried gym memberships before but felt intimidated and eventually stopped going. He was looking for someone who could help him build sustainable habits and gain confidence in a fitness environment. I've read about the importance of having clear goals and realistic expectations, he wrote. I'm not looking for a quick fix or dramatic transformation. I want to learn proper form, build consistency, and develop a healthier relationship with exercise and nutrition. As a trainer, this was exactly the kind of mindset I loved working with. Too many people expect miracles in 30 days, but Robert seemed to understand that real fitness is about long-term lifestyle changes. We exchanged a few more emails discussing his goals, any injuries or limitations, and logistics. He was flexible about scheduling and said he preferred to meet at public parks or outdoor spaces rather than his home or a gym, which was actually refreshing. Many of my clients liked outdoor training once they tried it. We scheduled our first session for a Saturday morning at Hart Park on 19th Street. I suggested we meet at 8 a.m. when the weather would be cooler and the park less crowded. Robert agreed immediately and asked what he should bring besides water and comfortable workout clothes. Saturday, September 9th, was a typical early fall day in Bakersfield, clear skies, about 75 degrees, perfect for outdoor exercise. I arrived at Hart Park a few minutes early and parked my 2021 Honda CR-V near the main entrance. I always liked to scope out the area before clients arrived, especially new ones. Robert was already there, stretching near the playground area. He looked exactly like I'd expected from our email exchanges. Average height, a bit overweight but not drastically, wearing proper athletic shoes and workout clothes. He waved when he saw me approaching and seemed genuinely excited to get started. Jessica, thank you so much for meeting me here. I've been looking forward to this all week. We spent the first 15 minutes going through a basic fitness assessment, checking his range of motion, discussing any areas where he felt discomfort, and talking about his exercise history. Robert was attentive, asked good questions, and seemed genuinely interested in learning proper form. The workout itself went great. We focused on bodyweight exercises and basic movements, squats, lunges, push-ups, and some core work. Robert followed instructions well, didn't try to do too much too fast, and maintained good form throughout the session. What impressed me most was his focus on the details that many clients ignore. He asked about breathing techniques, wanted to understand which muscles each exercise was targeting, and took notes on his phone about the workout routine. I like to review everything afterward, he explained. I learn better when I can go over the information again later. After about 45 minutes, we wrapped up with some stretching and a discussion about next steps. Robert was enthusiastic about scheduling regular sessions and asked detailed questions about nutrition planning and home workout routines. I really appreciate your approach, he said as we walked back toward the parking area. You're not just showing me exercises, you're helping me understand the why behind everything. We scheduled our next session for the following Tuesday at the same location, and Robert paid me in cash for the session we just completed. He was polite, professional, and seemed like exactly the kind of client I enjoyed working with. But as I drove home, I noticed a dark green 2018 Nissan Altima that seemed to be following the same route I was taking. When I turned onto my street, the car continued past, so I figured it was just a coincidence. Tuesday's session went even better than Saturday's. Robert had clearly been practicing the exercises we'd covered, and he came prepared with specific questions about progression and intensity. He'd researched proper nutrition for his goals and wanted to discuss meal planning strategies. "I've been tracking my food intake like you suggested," he said, showing me a detailed log on his phone. "I'm starting to see patterns in when I make poor choices and what triggers them." We worked on upper body strength training that day, focusing on form and gradual progression. Robert was patient with himself, didn't try to lift too much weight, and consistently asked for feedback on his technique. But during our cool-down period, he started asking more personal questions. "Do you train a lot of clients at this park? I haven't seen any other trainers here. How long have you been living in Bakersfield? Do you like the area? What's your typical schedule like? Do you work evenings or mostly mornings?" The questions weren't inappropriate exactly, but they felt more personal than our previous conversations. I gave general answers and tried to steer the conversation back to fitness topics. As we finished up, Robert mentioned that he'd seen my car in the parking lot of the grocery store on Sunday afternoon. "I was going to say hi, but you looked busy loading groceries, so I didn't want to interrupt." That struck me as odd. Hart Park was on the north side of Bakersfield, but the grocery store he mentioned was near my apartment complex on the south side of town. It would be a strange coincidence for him to be shopping in that area if he lived near the park where we trained. Thursday's session was our third meeting, and Robert continued to make good progress. But I started noticing things that made me uncomfortable. He arrived at the park 15 minutes early and was always positioned where he could see me pull into the parking lot. During exercises, he'd ask questions that required me to demonstrate movements while he watched very closely, even for exercises he already understood. "Can you show me that squat form one more time? I want to make sure I'm seeing the correct hip position." He started bringing a small towel and water bottle for me, saying he'd noticed I'd forgotten mine the previous session. I hadn't forgotten anything, I always brought my own water, but I didn't want to seem ungrateful. Most concerning was how much he'd learned about my routine. He mentioned seeing me at a coffee shop I frequented, knew what time I usually arrived at the park for other clients, and had somehow figured out that I lived in the Meadowbrook apartment complex. "I was driving through your neighborhood yesterday and saw your Honda. That's a nice complex. I looked at apartments there when I was moving to Bakersfield." After that session, I decided to test whether Robert was actually following me. Instead of driving straight home, I took a deliberately circuitous route through several neighborhoods, making random turns and stopping at a gas station I never normally used. The dark green Nissan Altima stayed with me for every turn. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, the Altima drove past but slowly, and I could see the driver looking toward my building. It was definitely Robert. I called off our next scheduled session, telling him I had a family emergency. His response was immediate and oddly detailed. "I'm so sorry to hear that, Jessica. I hope everything works out okay. I know you mentioned your parents live in Fresno. Is that where you need to go?" I had never mentioned my parents or where they lived. I had never discussed my family with Robert at all. That night, I checked all my social media accounts to see if somehow he'd found personal information about me online. My Facebook was set to private, my Instagram was professional only and didn't include personal details, and my LinkedIn just had basic career information. But when I looked at my business website, I realized I'd made a mistake. In my About Me section, I'd mentioned that I was originally from Fresno and had moved to Bakersfield to expand my fitness business. Robert had been paying attention to every detail. I decided to end our training relationship. I sent him a professional email explaining that I was restructuring my client's schedule and wouldn't be able to continue our sessions. I offered to refer him to other trainers in the area. His response came within an hour. "Jessica, I'm disappointed to hear this. I thought we had a great working relationship, and I've been making real progress with your help. I'd hate to lose the momentum we've built together. Can we discuss this in person?" Something about the tone felt off. It wasn't just disappointment about losing a trainer, it felt possessive. Over the next few days, I started seeing Robert's Nissan Altima in places where I wouldn't expect it. Near my apartment complex at times when we never scheduled sessions. In the parking lot of the gym where I trained some of my other clients. Outside the coffee shop where I sometimes worked on client programs. He wasn't just following me occasionally, he was tracking my daily routine. I contacted the Bakersfield Police Department and spoke with Officer Maria Santos in their Community Policing Division. She took my concerns seriously, especially when I showed her the pattern of Robert's emails and explained how he'd learned details about my life that I'd never shared. "This sounds like stalking behavior," Officer Santos said. "The fact that he's learned your routine, knows where you live, and is following you suggests this goes beyond normal client interest." She advised me to document every interaction, avoid being alone in places where Robert might approach me, and consider getting a restraining order if the behavior continued. The next day, I found a note on my car windshield in the parking lot of my apartment complex. "Jessica, I'm disappointed you won't return my calls or emails. I thought we had a connection beyond just trainer and client. I know you're probably just busy, but I miss our conversations. I'd like to discuss continuing our sessions." Robert. He'd been in my apartment complex's parking lot, knew which car was mine, and felt comfortable leaving notes. This was escalating quickly. I immediately called Officer Santos, who suggested I apply for a temporary restraining order while they investigated Robert's background. It turned out Robert Martinez wasn't his real name. His actual name was Robert Delacroix, and he had a history of stalking personal trainers and fitness instructors. Over the past 3 years, he targeted at least 4 other women in similar situations, responding to their advertisements, becoming seemingly ideal clients, then becoming obsessed and stalking them. In 2 cases, he'd escalated to breaking into their homes. In another, he'd sabotaged a trainer's car when she tried to end their professional relationship. His method was always the same: find female fitness professionals who advertised independently, become their most dedicated and appreciative client, then gradually escalate to stalking behavior while using the information he'd gathered during training sessions. He studies their routines, learns their schedules, and uses the trust built during training to get closer to them, Officer Santos explained. Personal trainers are particularly vulnerable because the profession requires building rapport and often involves some level of physical contact and personal space. Robert was arrested on stalking charges and violating the restraining order when he was found parked outside my apartment complex the day after being served with the court papers. During the search of his apartment, police found detailed files on me and 3 other trainers, including photos taken without our knowledge and copies of our schedules. He'd been planning this for months before ever contacting me through Craigslist. He'd researched my business, studied my online presence, and crafted his initial emails specifically to appeal to me as a trainer. Robert pleaded guilty to stalking and harassment charges and was sentenced to 2 years in prison with a permanent restraining order prohibiting him from contacting me or the other victims. He was also required to register as a stalker and undergo psychological evaluation. The experience completely changed how I screen potential clients and conduct business. I no longer train people at isolated locations, I don't share personal information during sessions, and I have strict policies about client communication outside of scheduled appointments. I also learned that legitimate clients don't need to know your personal routine, where you live, or details about your family. Professional boundaries aren't just good business practice, they're essential safety measures. The scariest part was how normal Robert seemed during our actual training sessions. He was polite, dedicated, and genuinely seemed to be making progress with his fitness goals. If he hadn't started following me, I might never have realized that his interest went far beyond personal training. It made me realize how vulnerable independent service providers can be, especially those who advertise on platforms like Craigslist where anyone can respond. The same qualities that make someone seem like a great client, attention to detail, enthusiasm, and personal interest, can actually be warning signs when they cross professional boundaries. Have you ever had a professional service provider who seemed to know too much about your personal life? What red flags do you think people should watch for when clients or service providers ask too many personal questions? I've been in estate sales and antique dealing for 23 years, and I thought I'd seen every kind of family secret that gets hidden away in old furniture. Financial documents, love letters, hidden valuables, you name it, I've probably found it tucked away in some forgotten drawer or compartment. But what I discovered in October 2023 still haunts me, because it revealed how someone can hide a lifetime of cruelty behind the facade of being a respected community member. My name is Thomas Anderson, and I run Heritage Estates Sales in Modesto, California. We specialize in helping families liquidate household contents when someone passes away or moves to assisted living. It's not always the most cheerful work, but it serves an important purpose for families dealing with difficult transitions. The call came from a woman named Patricia Walsh, whose elderly uncle had recently passed away. Charles Walsh had lived alone in a large Victorian house on Sycamore Avenue for over 40 years, and Patricia had inherited the property along with all its contents. Uncle Charles was a very private person, Patricia explained when we met at the house. He never married, didn't have close friends that I knew of, and rarely invited family over. The house is full of books, furniture, and collections, but I have no idea what any of it's worth or what to do with it all. Charles Walsh had been 78 when he died, and according to Patricia, he'd worked as a high school principal for 35 years before retiring. He was known in the community as someone who was strict but fair, and several former students had attended his funeral to pay their respects. He was very organized and kept detailed records of everything, Patricia said as she showed me through the house. I found filing cabinets full of financial documents going back decades, and every book in his library is catalogued and numbered. The house was indeed immaculately organized. Charles Walsh had clearly been someone who valued order and precision. His personal library took up 3 rooms and contained over 2,000 books, mostly focused on history, education, and what appeared to be extensive collections of local newspapers and yearbooks. I'm hoping some of this might be valuable to collectors, Patricia said. Uncle Charles spent a fortune on books over the years, and he always said his collection would be worth something someday. We scheduled the estate sale for the following weekend, and I spent the next few days cataloging items and researching potential values. Most of Charles Walsh's furniture was solid but not particularly valuable, but his book collection was impressive. He had first editions of several classic novels, complete sets of historical texts, and an extensive collection of educational materials that might interest teachers or researchers. One item that caught my attention was a large oak chest in his bedroom that appeared to be from the 1920s. It was locked, and Patricia didn't have a key, but it was a beautiful piece that would definitely attract buyers even if we couldn't open it. Uncle Charles always kept that chest locked, Patricia told me. When I was a child, I used to be curious about what was inside, but he said it was just old papers and documents that weren't important. The estate sale ran Friday through Sunday, and we had good turnout. Charles Walsh's reputation in the community brought several former colleagues and students who were interested in his educational materials. The book collection sold well, and most of the furniture found buyers. The locked oak chest generated particular interest. 3 different people asked about it, wanting to know if we had a key or if they could examine the contents before bidding. I explained that we were selling it as is, locked, and that buyers would be responsible for opening it themselves. A woman named Helen Martinez, who taught at the local community college, ended up purchasing the chest for $150. She said she collected antique furniture and that even if there was nothing valuable inside, the chest itself was worth the price. I love the mystery of it, she said as she arranged for pickup. It's like buying a treasure chest without knowing what treasure might be inside. Helen contacted me 2 days later, and her voice was shaking. Mr. Anderson, I need to speak with you about that chest I bought. I managed to get it open, and what I found inside. I think you need to see this. Can you come to my house? I drove to Helen's home on Birch Street that evening, curious about what could have upset her so much. She led me to her garage, where the oak chest sat open on her workbench. I had a locksmith come and open it this morning, Helen explained. I was expecting old photos, maybe some financial documents. Instead, I found this. Inside the chest were dozens of journals, notebooks, and manila folders filled with handwritten pages. At first glance, it looked like the kind of record-keeping you'd expect from a meticulous person like Charles Walsh. But as Helen showed me some of the contents, I realized we were looking at something much darker. The journals spanned over 40 years, starting when Charles Walsh was in his 30s. Each one was dated and organized by year, with entries that initially appeared to be routine daily observations. But the subject matter was disturbing. Charles Walsh had been documenting his systematic harassment and psychological abuse of students, colleagues, and community members. The earliest entries, from the 1980s, described his methods for identifying students he considered problematic, and the various ways he would make their school experience difficult. He wrote about manipulating grades, creating disciplinary situations, and using his authority to undermine students' confidence and academic prospects. March 15, 1983, Angela Rodriguez continues to show defiance in hallway interactions. Arrange for her to be assigned detention for uniform violations that technically don't exist in the handbook. Important to establish clear consequences for students who don't show proper respect. April 2, 1983, Rodriguez's mother came in to complain about the detentions. Explained that Angela's attitude problems are affecting other students and that consistent discipline is necessary. Mother seemed to accept this explanation. Rodriguez has been much more compliant since. But the journals went far beyond school discipline. Charles Walsh had detailed records of how he'd used his position and reputation to harm people he disliked throughout the community. He wrote about reporting neighbors for code violations that didn't exist, spreading rumors about local business owners, and using his connections to make life difficult for anyone who crossed him. The entries were clinical and methodical, describing his actions like scientific experiments. June 10, 1987, the Martinez family's landscaping business has been getting too much neighborhood work. Filed complaints with city planning about noise violations and unlicensed vehicle parking. Also mentioned to several neighbors that their work quality seemed substandard. Will monitor results. June 24, 1987, Martinez Landscaping lost the Morrison account and the Stevens contract. Success indicates that reputation damage combined with bureaucratic pressure is effective for small business targets. The most disturbing entries involved students who had challenged his authority or families who had complained about his treatment of their children. Charles Walsh had maintained detailed files on these people for decades, tracking their lives and looking for opportunities to cause problems years after they'd left his school. Helen showed me a section from 1995 where Charles Walsh described sabotaging a former student's job application by providing a negative reference to potential employers, claiming the student had been disciplinary problems in high school 15 years earlier. This person didn't even remember me, he wrote. But I remembered every instance of disrespect and insubordination. Long-term consequences are often more effective than immediate punishment. There were over 30 journals in the chest, containing hundreds of these entries. Charles Walsh had spent 4 decades systematically harming people while maintaining his reputation as a respected educator and community member. But the most chilling discovery was in the most recent journal, dated just 6 months before his death. Charles Walsh had been planning to expand his activities in retirement. With more free time available, I can be more strategic about community interventions. Volunteer positions with city planning and school board will provide new opportunities to address problematic individuals and families. He'd identified specific people he wanted to target, and had developed elaborate plans for using his retirement volunteer work to cause them problems. The fact that his death had interrupted these plans was probably the only thing that saved his intended victims. Helen and I spent 3 hours going through the contents of the chest, and we both felt physically sick by the end. This wasn't just a record of someone being difficult or petty, it was documentation of a calculated campaign of psychological abuse that had affected hundreds of people over 4 decades. What do we do with this? Helen asked. Some of these people are still alive. They have a right to know what happened to them, but this information could be devastating. I contacted the Modesto Police Department the next morning and spoke with Detective Lisa Rodriguez, no relation to the Angela Rodriguez mentioned in the journals. She agreed to meet us and examine the contents of the chest. This appears to be documentation of harassment, stalking, and possibly criminal abuse of power, Detective Rodriguez said after reviewing several of the journals. While many of these actions might not have been illegal at the time, they represent a pattern of behavior that we need to investigate. The police investigation that followed was extensive and heartbreaking. Detectives contacted dozens of people mentioned in Charles Walsh's journals, and many confirmed that they'd experienced unexplained problems during the periods he'd documented. Former students reported receiving negative references from their high school years later, even for jobs completely unrelated to education. Parents described bureaucratic problems with city services that had seemed random at the time but aligned perfectly with Charles Walsh's journal entries. Local business owners realized that complaint campaigns and regulatory problems they'd faced over the years could be traced back to Charles Walsh's documented activities. "It explains so much," said Maria Santos, whose family restaurant had faced a series of health department complaints in the 1990s that were later determined to be unfounded. "We never could figure out why we were being targeted, but now we know it was because my daughter had complained about Mr. Walsh's treatment of students with learning disabilities." The investigation revealed that Charles Walsh had used his reputation as a respected principal to harm people systematically while appearing to be a pillar of the community. His meticulous record-keeping had been intended to help him track his successes, but instead it provided evidence of decades of abuse. Several civil lawsuits were filed against Charles Walsh's estate, though collecting damages proved difficult since he'd carefully avoided actions that were technically illegal. Most of his harassment had been conducted through official channels and social manipulation rather than direct threats or violence. The school district where Charles Walsh had worked launched an internal investigation and implemented new policies for reporting and investigating administrative abuse. They also provided counseling resources for former students who had been affected by his actions. Patricia Walsh was devastated when she learned about her uncle's secret activities. "I knew he could be strict and demanding, but I never imagined he was capable of deliberately hurting people like this," she said. "Our family had no idea what he was really like." She donated the proceeds from the estate's sale to a fund for victims of workplace harassment and educational abuse, saying she didn't want to benefit from her uncle's assets. The case received significant media attention and led to discussions about how authority figures can abuse their positions while maintaining public reputations as respected community members. It also highlighted the importance of oversight and accountability in educational and administrative roles. What disturbed me most about Charles Walsh's journals was how calculating and patient he was. This wasn't someone who lost his temper or acted impulsively. He planned his actions carefully and took satisfaction in their long-term effects on his victims. Many of the people he targeted were students who had simply questioned his methods or parents who had advocated for their children. His response was to systematically undermine their lives for years or even decades. The experience changed how I approach estate sales, particularly when dealing with locked containers or private papers. I now work with families to review potentially sensitive documents before they go to public sale, and I'm more aware of how family secrets can affect entire communities. It also made me think about how many other people might be hiding similar patterns of behavior behind respectable facades. Charles Walsh's journals only came to light because he died and someone bought his locked chest at an estate sale. How many other victims of systematic harassment never get answers about what happened to them? Have you ever experienced unexplained problems with employers, officials, or authority figures that seem personal rather than professional? Do you think there are warning signs when someone in a position of power is using that authority to settle personal grudges? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.